guys for joining us for tonight's virtual class. My name is Jeb Beasley. I'm the manager for the Hunting and Fishing Academy here at the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. I've also got a good friend of mine, Wes McCracken, on here. Wes, why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself a little bit and tell the folks a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm a U.S. Coast Guard veteran who lives in East Tennessee, Elizabethton specifically. I'm the assistant program lead for Project Healing Waters chapter, Johnson City chapter. And I love fishing and I love teaching people. That's like my passion, man. I'm
Yeah.
happy to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm super glad to have you here. Me and Wes just worked together a few weeks ago. We did a trout fishing workshop on the Watauga River in Elizabethton. So super glad to have him here for the virtual class. I think he's going to be great at helping answer some of y'all's questions. He's a big trout fisherman, done it a whole lot more than I have even. So really excited to have you here, Wes. So I got a pretty good mix, Wes, of people saying I've never been, but I'm excited to start, all the way up to people, I've been 10 plus times or more. So we've got some new folks, we've got some folks with some experience. So I think that's good. We're going to have a pretty good mix as we go through.
Is there any way that you can possibly screenshot that so I can see the actual numbers?
Yeah. Here, let me share results.
Okay, there you go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, all right, I got one more question here just in a second that you guys are going to answer. But basically, by the end of this class, what we're trying to accomplish is we want you to identify the 3 species of trout found in Tennessee. I really need to update that to 4 now. We'll talk about those here soon. We want you to recall 2 natural food sources for trout. Recall the role that structure plays in locating trout in a stream as well. So some basic stuff, we're going to highlight those, but if you've got some more advanced questions or things that you're wanting to know, feel free to cover those as well, or ask those in a question. We're going to cover a few other things, but those are the 3 main things we're going to try to hit on before we get into tonight's class. So again, tonight, what are we going to discuss? We're going to talk about the trout that we find in Tennessee. We're going to talk a little bit about strategy, where to find them, how to fish a stream, what to fish with, and then again, where to fish, how to know where to go, finding access and things like that. So let's just jump right in and start talking about the trout that we've got in Tennessee. And Wes, feel free to jump in at any point and add anything if you feel like I've missed something. But the first one we're going to talk about is brook trout. Brook trout are Tennessee's only native trout, meaning that we didn't introduce brook trout here. They've always been here. We have wild populations, but I'm sure that there also are some stocking programs for brook trout. But typically, these are going to be the fish that you find in higher elevations. So if you're up in Wes's neck of the woods, you're up closer to the Smokies and you get out in the mountains, that's probably where you're going to find these fish. They're not going to be the biggest trout out there. Typically, we're looking at 7 to 12 inch fish at maturity. And then they're going to be spawning in the fall. You can always tell that it's a brook trout by looking at those green colorations they've got with all those different colored speckles down the body. That's kind of a giveaway that it's a brook trout. So when you think Tennessee and native fish, brook trout should always be one of those first ones that come to mind. We also have a few other types of trout here in Tennessee that aren't necessarily native. And we'll talk about the difference between native and wild. But the next one we'll cover is brown trout. These are going to be a little bit bigger fish. They're going to go upwards of 20 inches. A lot of times they're going to be bigger than that when they reach full maturity. They also spawn in the fall. And these fish are really known for a strong, aggressive bite. So there's a lot of anglers that really love going after big brown trout because they put up a fight on the line, and people really enjoy fishing for them. And like I said, they're not native to Tennessee, but we do have, wild and stock populations. Really, the biggest difference between native and wild is wild means they're reproducing populations on their own. While they might not have been here from, centuries ago, we've introduced them and now they're reproducing on their own. So that's the biggest difference between native and wild. Brook are the only natives, but we have other wild populations of trout in different streams scattered all across the state. And brown trout, again, these dark brown red speckles down the body, that's kind of a giveaway that you're working with a brown trout. They've got more of that golden bronze brown kind of look to the coloration as well. All right, rainbow trout. So rainbows are probably the most abundant wild trout species that you're going to find in Tennessee, whether you're fishing, tailwater stream in Middle Tennessee, or you're fishing the Clinch River here in Knoxville or something like that, you're probably going to run into rainbow trout. These are probably the ones that most people think of when they think of trout fishing right off the start. You always kind of know it's a rainbow trout when you see that pink stripe going down the middle of the body. These actually spawn in the spring, so this is a great time to get out and start targeting some rainbows. And similar to brook trout, you're working with a fish that is going to be upwards of 15 inches or so. So we're not working with huge fish, but some of them can get bigger than that, given the right circumstance and the right environment.
Hey, Jeb.
Yeah.
I just want to mention this. I was going to say something about the brook trout and the brown trout, the rainbow trout. So I just figured I'd just wait until you talked about all three of them.
Yeah.
The brook trout, at least here, they're going to be very small. And like you said, in higher elevations, in cold, like year-round water, it's going to be really hard to fish because there's probably going to be rhododendrons like overgrowing everything. And it's not where you want to start out trout fishing, but you want to get to that point of being able to go fish for those fish because they're awesome. But and then the brown trout, a lot of them here, at least in the Elizabethton area in the Watauga, yes, you have monster fish, but you're more than likely going to catch, let's say a 10 to 16-inch fish is going to be about average. I think from what I've been told is that Watauga holds about 1,000 fish per mile, and so there's fish everywhere. And right now, there's bugs coming up everywhere. So brown trout, Watauga River, that's where you're going to catch them. And the rainbow trout, there's a bunch of rainbows in the Watauga also. In my experience, because I fished a lot of the small creeks and stuff, there are some monster brown trout, but more than often you're going to catch much larger rainbow trout, say pushing 16 plus inches. Of course, you're going to catch more than a handful of 4 to 6 inch fish because we have a good, at least in Stony Creek, there's a good population of wild rainbow trout. And so you're going to catch a bunch of little guys, you're going to catch a bunch of their big brothers, and you're going to catch a bunch of their grandfathers occasionally. So, yeah, sorry.
No, all great information. Like I said, feel free to jump in at any point. So that being said, for a long time, really, these were the only 3 trout species that you could find in Tennessee. Obviously, we talked about rainbows and browns. They were introduced here to kind of supplement the fishing quality. And those were the 3 trout species we had for a long time in the state of Tennessee. But here recently, if you go to TWRA's website, they've got a lot of information on this. You can also, in certain parts of the state, in certain streams, you can start finding cutthroat trout. TWRA's recently started stocking cutthroats back in 2021 in certain tailwater streams across the state. And they've got a list of the ones where you can find cutthroats. But these are usually associated with kind of like Western fishing, if I'm correct, Wes. But a lot of times... Yeah, so this is just an opportunity. TWRA is trying to introduce these to a few new streams in the state just to add to the fishing quality. So depending on where you're at, you might be able to run into some cutthroat trout as well. They look kind of similar to a brown trout in a lot of ways. They have that olive kind of silvery bronze color almost. But you kind of can tell the difference between a brown and a cutthroat because cutthroats typically have this bright reddish orange patch underneath their jaws, right? Underneath their throat, it kind of looks like they've been cut.
They do, so, but hey, don't be mistaken because there are cut bows out there also. Yep. It's a hybrid between a cutthroat and a rainbow. So they look like a rainbow, but they have the cutthroat gill plates and whatnot.
Yeah, and I've never caught a cutthroat, but like I said, from what I've read up on them and what TWRA's kind of listed out on their website, it seems like it's kind of similar in size to a rainbow trout. I probably around that 10 to 15 inch mark a lot of times is what you're working with there. But again, that's just another thing that TWRA's tried to do to add to the fishing quality to give anglers an opportunity to catch different types of fish. Tennessee has always been a destination place for trout fishing, especially East Tennessee, and now we've got even more opportunities to catch different types of fish. So we'll talk about where to find stocking schedules and all that later. But just wanted to let you know that this is a new opportunity, relatively new here in the last few years that a lot of people just weren't aware of. So just wanted to put that out there and let you guys know that we've got 4 trout species really in Tennessee that you can target. Anything to add there, Wes?
No, I'll wait to comment on what you said or you're going to talk about in a few minutes.
Yeah. All right, so we talked a little bit about the trout we have in Tennessee now. So let's talk about some considerations. And this is just a list, that I've put together after doing a lot of these events and talking with volunteers. And Wes, you might want to, add to this. But the things we're getting ready to talk about when you're going out to fish, things to think about. Cover and structure, and we'll give some examples of what that is and why it's important later. Food sources, what are the trout eating? That's going to influence maybe some of the decisions you make when you get ready to go out and go fish. Water temperature and your flow rates. A lot of times in Tennessee you're fishing for trout in tailwater streams. So we want to make sure we're knowing, what the flow is, what's our water temperature, how is that affecting the fish. And then the gear that you're using, gear fishing or, spin fishing versus fly fishing. A lot of times people associate trout fishing with fly fishing right off the cuff. We did that event the other day in Elizabethton, and I had fly gear and spinning gear, and everybody's like, oh, I just want to fly fish. So I don't want to make it sound like you have to fly fish to go catch trout, because that's not necessarily the case, but we're going to touch briefly on each of those. I'm sure some of you watched the fly fishing virtual class that our Middle Tennessee rep, Taylor Fox, did a few weeks ago. So we're going to touch on a few things here, but if you're interested in learning more about fly fishing specifically, we've got a whole nother virtual class. I can send you the recording if you would like to watch that one and learn more on that. All right, so let's break down each of these considerations that we just discussed. So the importance of structure. When we're talking about structure, what are we talking about? We're talking about things like big rocks in the stream bed, a log that's fallen out and gotten wedged between in the bank and sticking out into the water, overhanging limbs, things like that are providing some kind of place for the fish to get in, to hide, and it has a lot of important things that it provides the fish that's going to help you as an angler as well. One, a lot of times when we're talking about trout fishing, we're talking about streams that look like what's in the picture. It's fast, clear moving water, and so having structure provides those fish with a place to conserve their energy. They're not always having to swim out in the middle of that stream when they can kind of get tucked behind a rock. That flow is not as strong, so they can conserve their energy. They're not having to give it all they've got, swimming against the current all the time. So they can conserve their energy. It also provides them an ambush point for their prey, right? We're going to talk here soon about what these trout are eating. But one of the things you're going to hear us talk about is that they eat a lot of different things, and that they're very predatory in terms of how they go out and catch their prey. So having structure, things like rocks and logs, gives them a place to tuck away and hide so that they can make a strike at whatever it is they're trying to eat. It also provides some good habitat for spawning. We talked a little bit about how some are spawning in the fall, some are spawning in the spring, but having a place for them to, lay their eggs and then be safe, that all is a very important consideration when trying to find where the trout are in a stream. And then also it gives them a place to escape predators like us and hawks and all the other things that are swooping down and trying to snatch them out of the water. So great places for them to hide. Again, big rocks, logs, any kind of blowdown that hangs out into the water. It can even be things that aren't supposed to be in the rivers, like old tires and things like that we don't want in our streams, but the wildlife adapt to it, right? And can use it sometimes. So anything you'd add there, Wes, on structure, kind of what to look for whenever you get
Absolutely.
out?
I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, I wish that you had A, B, C, D, E, F, and G on the screen right now and said, where do you start fishing first? Because it's just, there's a certain way that I approach the river or the creek, because this looks like my creek. At the bottom of the screen there, you get riffles, right? Does everybody know what riffles are? Yes or no? That's okay.
If you don't, we're going to talk about that real soon.
Okay. Well, the riffles they actually provide cover for the fish, and it's also well oxygenated, like place that the fish are happy. And there's lots of food. It's like a conveyor belt of food. So that's where I would start fishing first, right? And then you move up to the big rock in the middle right of the screen. And believe it or not, when the water's flowing down the river, it's hitting the face of the surface of that rock, and it's actually creating a pillow. And the fish will sit in that pillow because it's a softer current, like Jeb was saying, where they can just sit there and chill out, and then watch all this, you know, food conveyor belt going around their faces. So if they see something like, they just pop out, get it, and go right back to their pillow. And there's also behind in the rock because the rock is creating seams. And Jeb, I'm sorry, I can talk about this picture all day,
No, you're good. It's good
but
information.
there's seams that come off the rock, and you'll see them as a most of the time a bubble line, and it's like a V. I'm not sure if anybody can see it, but it looks like a V coming off the rock, and I'm sure everybody's seen it. So the fish are going to sit right to the inside rock side of that V because the water's slower and easier. I mean, who wouldn't want to sit a recliner and just be able to reach their hand out and get a dip of popcorn or whatever it is? Because it's easy for them. And then you're going to move up in the picture to probably, let's say, the next big rock up and to the left that's on the bank. Yep, that one right there. That's going to be a slow section in the water. It's probably deeper and slower just based up upon the watercolor and the surface of it. Or you have that Riffley waterfall coming down, which is creating a plunge pool, which is also a food mecca. But those fish again are going to want to sit. Maybe they just want to take a nap and they're sitting deep and low in that deep pool, but they want to be near a food source. So it's all about the slow and the fast, finding the seams and the bubble lines. And again, I can talk about this all day. So
No,
go on, man.
it's a good introduction because I think here in a second we've got some I got some different little graph pictures that we'll look at that I think will make good sense. But like this is kind of a good visual of kind of some of the things we're talking about. You know, finding trout in relation to structure. So when we say they're like getting behind rocks to conserve energy, like you can kind of see how the current's coming down, they'll tuck in behind. If you've got a big log, they'll tuck in behind. And you can kind of see those seams that Wes is talking about when they come around those rocks. It's going to make a seam where food's coming around and it makes it really easy pickings for the fish.
Oh man, see right there at the bottom, that's a great representation. Uh, do you see the eddies right there, the little swirly things? Those are called
Yep.
an eddy. And if you notice, those two fish are actually facing the wrong way in the creek or river. That's because the water is coming around that big rock into a bend and is allowing it to swirl, which is actually changing the direction of the water. So when fishing those spots, you have to fish them opposite, be it spin tackle, fly angler, or bobber fisherman, especially. It's like you don't want to cast behind the fish; you want it to float to the fish's face, basically.
Yep. And I think I've got another one here. Maybe it's in a second, so we'll get there. But just to keep things moving, what are they eating? We talked about structure a little bit. I've got some other graphics we'll look at here soon that kind of break down that river and kind of where to look for fish. But, what are these fish eating? They're carnivorous, they're predatory fish, and so they're eating a lot of different things. This time of year, there's a lot of aquatic insects that they're going to be eating, and we're going to look at a couple examples here soon. Crustaceans, even things like little snails and crawdads at times, they're eating those things. Even other smaller fish, minnows and things of that nature. They'll target those different types of things. And so on the aquatic insect side specifically, the ones that you'll hear fly fishermen talk a lot about are mayflies and your caddisflies. Those are two of the most popular ones, at least that I hear people talking about. They're not the only ones, but you hear people talk about match the hatch. When we're talking about aquatic insects, these are bugs that are they're laying their larvae and their eggs underwater, and they go through these different metamorphic stages until they reach adulthood, and what we see is the flying creature above the water surface, right? Well, trout are going to eat these insects at all these different stages of the metamorphic cycle, right? So when you're fly fishing, you might be tying on a fly that is supposed to be a dry fly that looks like a full-grown mature mayfly. Well, maybe it's something else that's in a nymph stage. So just something to be thinking about when we're talking about what these trout are eating. They're eating things underneath the surface of the water that we're not necessarily seeing. Now, everybody loves those visuals of the trout leaping out of the water and grabbing the mayflies and things like that above the surface, and that's great. But there's also a lot of things underneath the surface of the water that we're not seeing that's going on. And so they're eating all these different aquatic insects. They're eating crustaceans, other small fish, things of that nature. So, Wes, why don't you touch briefly just on kind of matching the hatch, and when you're thinking about, maybe fly fishing specifically, what are you looking for this time of year?
Well, this time of year, there's so many different species of mayflies coming off, and the caddis hatch is going to be, it'll go on for the rest of the summer, but the big caddis hatch just happened around Mother's Day. I think I mentioned that at the uh, little get together the other weekend, where if you look for the dogwoods start blooming, once the leaves or the petals start falling off the trees, that's when the caddises are really going to be blowing up. But to keep it brief, matching the hatch. Okay. 75 to 90% of your eats are going to be subsurface. So if you're fishing a bobber rig or indicator rig in the fly fishing world, um, double nymph rig, uh, heavy weighted one below, probably a pheasant tail because it pretty much imitates everything. If you're fishing the creek here, a waltz worm variant because it looks like nothing and imitates everything. But right now on the Watauga River, there are sulfurs coming off everywhere, which is a sulfur mayfly. It's a pale yellow in color, probably. Oh, I probably can't see me, but let's say 3/8 of an inch or less. So that's probably anywhere between a 16 and 20 in hook size. And don't be afraid to fish small flies because small hooks land big fish. I can tell you that because I proved it to my wife multiple times. But there's blueing olives, sulfurs, and these little brown. I want to say red quill mayflies or red quill style mayflies. A lot of those coming off. So the trout were blowing up the water. I'm working. I'm currently working. I know I'm going on and on, but I'm currently working at a house that's literally on the Watauga River, so I get to go fish at lunch break. And all I have was my streamer rod today, and I was so upset because there were so many dry flights today. So yeah.
Yeah. One thing you said that I think is always shocking to a lot of people is that, when you're talking about fly fishing, a lot of times the flies are so small, you're thinking there's no way the fish is even going to see that. And then you go out there and, you'll throw it out there and let it float. And before you know it, you've got something on there. So, again, they're very in tuned with what's going on under the surface. And so fishing small, I think is something that a lot of people are kind of, myself included, are kind of nervous to do because they're like, I just don't know if is it even working? Like, do I need to do something different? But
No,
again,
you absolutely need to try it.
yep,
At least do a 16, and because that's not even small. At least it's not small to me anymore. 16's a pretty big fly, and
yep,
no, they work, man, 100%.
yep. So just some things to keep in mind. Like I said, I know we kind of covered some of that pretty quick, but just want to give you an idea of what they're eating underneath the surface. Again, to reiterate, aquatic insects, crustaceans, even other small fish. And so right here, this is what I was wanting to get to earlier, is kind of breaking down those sections of a river, right, or a trout stream. So Wes was talking earlier about the riffles. That's where you get a lot of rocks kind of packed on top of each other, shallow water, where you get a lot of the white water ripples on top. And then it kind of stretches out into these runs, which form deeper pools. And then those eddies, which he was talking about, where you've got some kind of structure sticking out into that stream flow, and it's causing that water to swirl. And like Wes was talking about, that's where a lot of times your food sources are coming through these rocks. They're getting filtered through those riffles, and then they're settling into these eddies right here. And so a lot of times when you see that water that's doing that reverse pooling nature, that's a lot of times where your fish will hang out. But again, other times they'll hang out in these deeper pools, and then you'll get a tail out, which then turns into another riffle, and the cycle just kind of continues. So, Wes, I know you hit on some of this earlier, but looking at this imagery, is there anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, put your little the mouse on the top right dark blue arrow.
This one?
Yep. All right. If you are standing on the opposite side of the bank from that arrow, okay, and casting to a fish that's right there because you know there's one hiding under that log, it's going to be very difficult. I'm sorry, I had to say that because I literally have this exact scenario about 50 yards up from my house, and there's a monster brown trout that lives under this overhanging ledge that just is hanging out in this little hydraulic while all this super fast water is just flowing by him, and it's just so hard to get the cast to it.
Yeah. And then just to kind of, again, keep painting that picture so you kind of get a feel for where the trout might be at. Wes said earlier, he said the same thing that I always say and hear people talk about. Those riffles are just a conveyor belt of food a lot of times. And so when those riffles come through right here, a lot of times those fish will be stacked up at the end of it, somewhere where they can peek up over these rocks and catch those different insects or, even the other small fish that get caught up in those riffles. They'll hang out right there where it kind of starts to go down into those deeper pools. They'll stack up at the edge of a riffle and just wait for all that food to go drifting over top of them. And they're not having to exert a lot of energy right here either, especially if they can get tucked behind some kind of structure. It's really easy for them to pop their head out, grab what they need, and then kind of reposition again.
Hey, Jeb, I just wanted, I'm not sure if you're going to touch on this. I'll be fast, I promise. The TWRA actually has their stocking schedules for all the waters in Tennessee readily and available to the public. And most of the creeks and streams around here are being stocked twice a month.
Yeah.
And that being said, if you know the water was stocked that day, fish it the next day because it takes about 12 plus hours for the fish to become comfortable enough to eat.
Yeah. I've got some slides here in a second we'll look at that kind of show, or they'll talk about how to find like when and where they're stocking them and all of that. So we'll come back to that here in a second.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, you're good. You're good. I want to make sure we cover some of these other things, and then we'll wrap up with that. But we talked about water temp earlier with some of the conditions to think about. If you're like me and you grew up fishing more lakes than streams, you were fishing a lot of warm water. So growing up, I did a lot of bass fishing, catfish, things like that. Well, those types of fish typically prefer those warmer water temps. This time of year, the bass and the catfish, it's not going to affect them as much when that water temp starts warming up. Well, for trout, they're a cold water fish. They like those lower temperatures because it helps keep that water oxygenated for them in a way that keeps them healthy and keeps them active. When you start getting up above 68 degrees, 70 degrees, or in the dead of summer, the water, maybe if it's not moving, that can be pretty dangerous for them. They're not going to be quite as active because they're trying not to move and exert a bunch of energy. But on the flip side, when the water gets super, super cold, below 45 degrees freezing temperatures, they're also going to be kind of moving slow and being lethargic. They might not be eating quite as much, but a lot of times you're looking at that, 50 to 60 degree range can be pretty good in terms of water temp for trout. The tailwater streams that we have in the state, meaning you're fishing below a dam, they're drawing that water out from the bottom of a lake. So even in the dead of summer, that water is going to be really, really cold. The other day when we were in Elizabethton, it was fairly warm. It was in the 70s, 80 degrees, but that water temp was still about 50 degrees. And then there's places in the mountains too where you get high elevation. It's not a tailwater stream, it's a headwater. But that water temperature in those higher elevation areas is also going to be pretty cold. So just keep that in mind, as a lot of times you're, especially if you're wading or wet wading or something like that, the water temp is going to be a lot colder than if you were to just go step off into the lake where the water's not moving quite as much. All right, Wes, we did have a question here. Do cutthroat also like cold water temps? I haven't looked at it kind of on a species by species basis, but I would assume that it's pretty similar to the other trout species.
Yeah, it's a trout species, and from what Tom Rosenbauer from Orvis, if you know who he is, he's told me it's that yes, they like the water temps around the same temperature as rainbow trouts and the brown trouts. So anywhere between freezing to don't handle the fish above 68, 69 degrees. If you catch one, unhook it in the water if you can, barbless hooks, maybe. I recommend it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of places like that if the water temp does get above a certain temperature, they have certain regulations even that say like you got to use a barbless hook or something like that. I know that's something that's done in other states at times. And it's all about reducing the stress on the fish, because when the water gets up too warm, you don't want to be stressing them out to where they're exerting energy and then you start having them die off. So all about reducing the stress, keeping them as comfortable as possible.
That's it. And hey, one last thing, because I know this didn't get mentioned the other weekend. When handling trout, at least the best of your ability, wet your hand first. So you're not using a dry hand. It's going to take that slime coating off. They don't have scales like a bass or a carp or anything like that. You can actually basically kill the trout with your dry hand when you release it, even though you think it's swimming away happy and healthy, but it's not. So,
yeah, that's a great point. All right, good questions though. All right, so tailwater trout and water flow, that was one of the other considerations. Again, tailwater meaning you're fishing below a dam similar to this. I think this is Center Hill Dam. So places like the Caney Fork, below Tim's Ford Lake, if you're kind of in the middle part of the state, there's a lot of trout fishing that happens below those dams. One of the things, just from a safety standpoint, that you want to take into account when you're fishing in places like this is that there's a generation schedule, meaning that they're going to start opening up. Generators to run the dam, and you're going to have a lot of water flow really quick, and so the water levels can rise really fast. So beware of high water and how quickly it can rise. If it's a TVA lake, or even if it's a Corps of Engineers dam or something like that, you can usually find the generation schedules online if you just Google it, if you know the name of the dam. So just take that into account. I know, Wes, we talked about it the other day, on the Watauga, talking about what the flow rates were going to be, but we don't have to get super into the weeds on some of that. I just wanted to make people aware that if you are fishing below a dam, try to hit it up when they're doing recreation flow or something like that.
Or call your local fly shop, even if you're a spin fisherman, and they'll tell you what the normal flows are, and then you can check the generation schedule and see what they're actual flowing, and then go from there.
Yeah. And a lot of times, like I said, they'll do what they call a recreation flow, meaning they don't run the generators on purpose for certain hours of the day to allow people to fish. Because even if you're a mile, 2 miles downstream, if they open up, 2 generators running on a dam, within an hour or so, that water is going to be up so high, and you don't want to be caught on the wrong side of the river if that's the case. So just be aware of those things. That information usually is somewhat easy to find. You can see like what day they're running them, the time, and how many generators they're running. So just try to take that into account if you're ever fishing below a dam. All right, we'll try to move through this stage fairly quick just because we're getting short on time. But equipment, obviously, like we said earlier, you don't have to be a fly fisherman to get out and catch trout. To be honest with you guys, I've not even caught a trout on a fly rod. All the trout fishing I've done has been gear fishing or spin fishing, just because that's what we did growing up. I fished the Caney a lot because I was from that area. So I'm very familiar with that type of fishing, and we'll talk about a little bit of both, but here's just kind of a really basic imagery of kind of the components of a fly rod, what makes it different. So, Wes, if you want to try to touch on this real quick, you can. But again, we have a whole other class that goes into all this stuff in a lot more detail. So if we don't answer the specific questions you were wanting to see now, well, we
No,
can
it's
provide
all
for you
good.
later.
It's all good, sir. I promise. But you'll never see your backing probably as a fly fisherman unless you're fishing giant fish, and your fly line's going to be out 90 feet. You're going to fish probably a 9 foot leader with tippet included, and yeah, I'd be more than happy to answer questions if you want to shoot me an email or hit me up on Facebook or something. So.
Yeah, I mean the big thing to just keep in mind here is that your rod and your reel or it's a different type of equipment, and so it requires kind of a different technique and different skill sets, and you're not using the weight of a lure that would be at the end of your line to throw out into the water, right? You're fishing with something that's light as a feather a lot of times, and so you're using the weight of that line to kind of get your momentum and to get your fly out into the water. So it's a completely different form of fishing. Again, I'm sorry we're kind of going through it quick, but we've got plenty of resources out there if you guys want to learn about that. Here's just some examples of different types of flies. You can tie your own. You can see Wes has got all his stuff back there behind him. He was working on it when we got on. So just some different examples of flies you might encounter. There's all kinds of names for them and things like that. So you can kind of look into the research on that, maybe start tying your own flies. Wes, you have anything you'd like to share there? Just like if you're a beginner fly fisherman, what are you going?
Go ahead and start tying some copper johns and beadhead pheasant tails or pheasant tail uh, variations, because that's going to be your go-to. Or actually tie the woolly bugger, because that's going to help you get more in depth. Or that one fly will help you tie so many other flies. Let me just say that. And then your hard one is going to be the parachute Adams, which is a great fly. But yeah, again, another subject that I could just talk for hours about. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll be sure when we send out some of the resource email with the recording of this class, I'll just add I'll add the recordings for some of the other virtual classes we've done that go more in depth on some of this stuff. So just letting you know, there's lots of different things out there that you can fish with. All right, gear fishing, spin fishing. I'm just going to give you a couple quick examples of maybe some of the gear that you would want to use in some different scenarios. Again, not going to go super in depth, just giving you an idea of kind of what to think about for the sake of time. But again, if you're going to go out and go fishing and you want to use live bait, something most of the time trout fishermen are using an ultralight or a lightweight rod. You're not going to be using a big, heavy, casting bait caster that you'd be using for bass fishing. You're using smaller, lightweight equipment. We're going after a smaller fish.
well, I mean, ultimately, what they're trying to simulate is a fly rod, and you're using actually the weight of the bobber and the flex of the rod to get your bait and your rig out there to the fish.
Yep. As far as line goes, I mean, obviously there's lots of different options. I have monofilament on there, 4 to 6 pound. You don't need big, heavy line. You could even use fluorocarbon a lot of times, especially if you're fishing like super, super clear water or something like that. If you're around spooky fish, sometimes that can help using a fluorocarbon line. But if you're just keeping it to the basics, 4 to 6 pound mono works. You don't need a great big hook. Smaller hooks can work. You might want to have some split shot and a small little bobber on there. Basic fishing. That's kind of getting back to the basics right there. And as far as what to tie on your hook, mealworms are a great option. You can go and get those, or the big night crawlers. The red wigglers work too. Again, this is basic fishing. A lot of times people don't think of this kind of stuff when you're talking about trout because they're thinking fly fishing and it's much more advanced, and that sounds hard, but
Oh no. No,
yeah,
you
you can
tie a squirming worm on. It's basically like worm fishing.
strip it down to the basics. One of the first times I took my fly rod out and was just kind of learning to play around with it, there was an old man fishing the clinch, and he stood still all day, and he would just tie a night crawler on there, and every few minutes he would hook into one. And I was sitting there, learning how to throw this fly rod. I was like, man, this guy's fishing the most basic way that you can possibly fish, and he's caught way more than I have. So Don't be afraid to strip it down to the basics, especially if you're new and you're just wanting to catch a trout to take home with you. Even this can be a great way to do that. You can also get the artificial stuff like those little dough baits. You can buy this stuff at Walmart, the little salmon egg type baits. Those are all great options too. If you're just wanting a cheap, easy way to get into it and catch a couple fish, those are
Yeah.
just a couple of things you might want to
Go
consider.
go with the chartreuse though.
Yep.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I don't know. They work better than the red ones for me.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
That's
I was a spin fisherman long before I was a fly fisherman.
That's true. Yep. I've also had a lot of people tell me they just catch them on corn. They'll take a can of corn and put corn kernels on there. So there's all kinds of stuff that trout will eat. That being said, you don't have to be an advanced fly fisherman to catch one. If you're wanting to spin fish, but you don't want to go the live bait route, you're going to tie on another lure. It's going to be similar setup. You're going to have an ultralight or lightweight rod, similar pound test. And then as far as what you're tying on, a lot of people have a lot of success with rooster tails, and we'll look at what those look like here in a second, or maybe even some other small crankbait. Most of the trout I caught on a rooster tail just because it adds a lot of flash, a lot of motion, and they seem to really like that. As a predatory fish, it can trigger something in them sometimes. So
Okay.
very, very similar setup. And all of this stuff is pretty cheap too. I mean, you could go to Walmart and spend less than $50 and have a pretty good little starter kit to just go catch a few fish if
Yeah,
that's
you
what
can
you
get a rod, your line, or a few rooster tails. March Brown being a go to. It's $50, man. You're out the door.
Yeah, and here's just a couple examples of what some of those look like. It's just a small spinning lure, and it's got these little skirts on it. You can get them in different colors, and a lot of times they have a treble hook on the backside of them. So this one even here on the lower right is painted to look like a small rainbow trout, and so a lot of people will catch them on those. I've had success on the white ones a lot of times. I don't know why. That's just something that I like. You can get those chartreuse bright colors as well. But these are like 99 cents at Walmart or $1. So you can buy those for pretty cheap and have some pretty immediate success if you're just getting started. Other little crankbaits, you got those little shad, the little minnow crankbaits that are smaller. You can catch trout on those. I've caught fish on those, and then these crawdad crankbaits can be a great little starter tool for you as well. They're eating crustaceans, so throwing one of these guys out there and retrieving it back to you, don't be surprised if a trout grabs hold of that as well. All right. All right. So let's talk about, we've kind of touched on this already, but Wes, why don't you walk us through your process of when you get to a stream. Again, what are you looking for? How are you fishing it? This is just a kind of a diagram of showing some different ways that you can fish. Not all of them might be suited for every scenario, but it just kind of depends on the stream and what you're looking for. But Wes, it would probably be helpful to just walk us through your process again and kind of reiterate some of those things you talked on
All right.
earlier.
So, but before you even put your feet in the water, you want to take a look and actually grasp what the water's doing. Are there fish rising? Where's the structure at? And then you're gonna break it down in like basically a grid. And if you're looking at the picture right here, what I would do, personally, I would cast upstream pretty much at that black arrow. I'd do that 3 or 4 times, nothing. I'd probably cast 1, 2, maybe 3 feet on the other side of the black arrow. And then trying to get that perfect dead drift. And that's another thing about fly fishing. You want your flies to float down the river or the creek with no drag, no animation, just like a piece of food would. But that's a whole nother story. So, anyways, you're breaking the river or the creek down in like a grid pattern. You're going at the black arrow, few feet past it, and then you're gonna work the far side of the bank. Now that can all change if you walk up to it, and then your high flow, high turbulence is on the side that you're on. Maybe you have to wade up the creek and then cross, then come back down and fish it, or go back down and cross and come back and fish the side that you were just trying to fish. And you really just have to. That's okay. When you get to the creek, you really have to take it in. Look and see what the creek or the river is doing. and then adapt and adjust to it, and then fish what you think to the best of your knowledge is where the fish are going to be, which is going to be in the seams, the bubble lines, in the little eddies, behind the cover, in front of the cover, and just yeah, you got to work it. You can't let it work you. You got to work the water, man.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. But again, like I said, it's going to depend on the scenario, right? Like I'm sure you get out to, one stream or one creek, and then you go to another one, and it's going to look completely different. So you kind of have to do what Wes is talking about and just work with what you got and come up with a strategy before you just get out there and start throwing stuff around everywhere. It's really the big takeaway I got anyway.
Yeah,
So,
no, you absolutely have to. That's if you want to catch fish or catch more fish, uh, become one with your environment, and understand what you're working with, and then make the best of it.
yep, good information. All right, we're almost done here, guys. Want to end tonight by kind of talking about where to fish, right? We have trout in all different places in Tennessee. If you're in the eastern part of the state, odds are you're probably within an hour or an hour and a half of somewhere to go trout fishing. And if you're in the middle parts of the state, there's plenty of opportunities. If you're on the western side of the state, you might have to drive a little bit more. But you can go to TWRA's website. If you just Google like Tennessee trout stocking map or something like that, it'll probably pull up a little interactive map that looks something similar to this. It's going to have all these different icons on it. But basically what these are is that these are all different trout stocking locations in the state. And you'll notice that there's going to be multiple stocking locations on the same river or the same stream a lot of times. And not all of them are stocked at the same time of year. There's like a spring trout stocking schedule, and then there's a fall and a winter trout stocking schedule. So you can click on these little icons, and it'll tell you one where it is with GPS points, and you can kind of zoom in on these interactive maps and see that. It'll tell you what they're stocking, and usually I think it'll tell you how often they're stocking it as well. So that's a really great tool that you guys might want to check out. It's an interactive map on their website. They try to make it pretty user friendly. I know these white icons, these are their winter trout stocking schedules. So they're only stocking these places in the winter. And a lot of times when it is winter, they'll put trout in places they otherwise wouldn't be. They'll put them in like a city pond or something like that. Because the water temps have dropped down, they'll put them in big ponds and things like that where they won't live forever, but they're there for you to go and catch and fish. And then they have these other icons that correlate with different stocking times and different species and things like that. So I'll have a link to this in the resource email where you guys can just click and go look at that. But it's a great resource. If you haven't found that already, I highly encourage you to start doing that.
Hey, Jim,
yeah, go ahead.
just real quick. Hey, just want to let everybody know, don't be afraid of going to your Walmart pond or their drainage pond or whatever they have there, or just your local pond and catching bluegill, because it is so much fun. And even if you're trying to fly fish, man, it is so much fun. Yeah, just had to add that in there.
No, yeah, I think specifically on the fly stuff, that's what everybody has told me is like, if you're just starting fly fishing, like go catch little panfish and stuff like that. And the skills, once you build on them, it translates out to, some of the more advanced trout fishing stuff. So
Absolutely.
But back to the stocking stuff. This is an old screenshot. This is from a couple years ago, but it looks pretty much the same. So don't look at these specific dates and take pictures of this. There's an updated version of this on TWRA's website, I'm sure. But if you go to your fishing guide, it'll have a list of all these different stocking schedules and the exact day that they will be there stocking them. So you can look at it by region. And kind of figure out where they're putting these fish. So in Region 1, which is West Tennessee, you've got a couple different places there where you can see they're stocking fish. Region 2's got a few. And then as you get into Region 3 and Region 4, there's going to be a lot more options just because we've got a lot more trout streams over on this side of the state. So it'll tell you the name of the water body. It'll tell you what day they're stocking it on. And so like Wes was saying earlier, do some homework before you go out. And if you know you're going to go fish, let's just use, for example, the Tellico River, Well, they're stocking it on all these different days for all these months on end. So use that information to your advantage. Try to go the day after they stock, and then you probably will have some pretty good success. But this can be a great tool for you to have. A lot of people don't even know this information is available. So we just want you to know that, hey, this is something to help you be successful. And we're just making you aware of it. TWRA is the one that puts all this information out for anglers. We're just kind of teach you how to go and find it. And I'll have links to all this again in the resource email tomorrow. All right. Well, we're right here at 8:30, so we're going to wrap up for the sake of time. We've got some questions we're going to stay and answer, but let's go ahead and do our post knowledge check-in, and we'll go over the answers to each of those at the end. Excuse me. So if y'all don't care, take a second just to answer those, and then we'll answer some of y'all's questions. Alrighty. Well, y'all can keep answering. I'm going to start reading through these just so we can keep the ball rolling. But which trout species was recently added to TWRA's stocking program? The correct answer there would have been cutthroat trout, just because, like we talked about, they've been stocking rainbows and browns and things like that. We've had those for a while. We don't have bull trout in Tennessee. That was just to trip you up. But we've got cutthroat trout now that are part of the regular stocking program across the state. All right, which of the following is a common food source for trout? Select all that apply. You guys did good. It's aquatic insects, crustaceans, and small fish. They're eating all kinds of different things above and below the surface. All right, rocks, logs, and similar forms of structure provide trout with a place to conserve energy, a place to escape their predators, a place to ambush their prey, or all of the above. You guys got it, all of the above. All big things to consider when you get ready to go out and go trout fishing. All right, Wes, we got a few questions here we can go over, and then we'll wrap up for the night. But somebody asked, why do we have to release trout if they're over 14 inches? And before you offer an answer, I will say there are certain regulations that are specific to certain waterways. So I'll let you elaborate on that, Wes, but just wanted to put that out there as a disclaimer.
Yes, the disclaimer should be there. It's that as far as I know, in the waters that I fish, there is no regulation like that. So, but the reason that they put that regulation out there is because once a fish reaches a certain length or an age, they become what's the word I'm looking for? Where they can reproduce or spawn.
Mm-hmm.
So what they're trying to let those fish reproduce naturally in the wild instead of having to constantly restock the creek with more fish.
Yeah, and if you look at like the statewide just blanket regulation, I don't think there is a minimum length limit of what you're allowed to keep, but they will have those different slots where it says if there's a fish within this size range, you've got to put it back. And it's to Wes's point, they're trying to encourage those fish to reach maturity so that they can start reproducing on their own. So always be sure to check your regulations. I know we didn't talk a whole lot about some of those specifics tonight, and the reason for that is just because it really just depends on where you're going to go fish. Always check your fishing guide to know what your creel limit is, what you're allowed to keep, and then if there are any specific, size regulations that you're allowed to keep as well. So always make sure you do your homework before you go out to the river. All right, Wes, a couple other here. Somebody asked, how hard is the strike when you're trout fishing?
Well, that depends on what method and or style of trout fishing or fly fishing that you're doing. I mean, if you're casting a rooster tail from a ultralight, then it's going to feel like a monster just crushed your lure, and you're going to reel it up, and it's going to be probably 10 to 12 inches, and you're like, man, this is awesome. Or man, it's way smaller than I thought. And nymphing with a fly rod, you're basically setting the hook on every little thing you feel. Hook sets are free. So if you're not setting the hook, then you're probably missing fish if you're doing that tight line nymphing style. And if you're fly fishing with a bobber or indicator, if your indicator goes down, then ultimately the strikes are subtle. unless you're fishing a streamer or a crankbait. That's the bottom line. It Yeah. I mean, I can't put any more simply than that unless you got something, Jeb.
No, I think that's good information. Again, it just depends. It depends on how big the fish is. It depends on what you're fishing with, all of that. But going back to the gear stuff we talked about earlier, a lot of times people like fishing for trout with that ultralight tackle because you get to feel that fight a little bit more on the line. So just things to consider. You're not always fishing for a 5 pound, 10 pound fish like for a bass, catfish, something like that. But for a fish that is smaller, they can put up a pretty good little fight and be
If
on the
if you
line.
come to my little creek, a 4 weight fly rod, your 9 to 10 foot, it's definitely small tight areas, but a lightweight fly rod catching 6 to 12 inch fish would just bring the biggest smile to your face. They're not monsters, but they're so much fun to catch.
Yep. All right, so this is a regulation question. I don't know this off the top of my head. I would have to go look, but they asked, do I need an additional trout stamp to fish the Tellico River? I don't know if you know that off the top of your head, Wes, but
I am almost 100% sure that you don't need the trout stamp to fish. You need the trout stamp to keep the fish.
okay. I'm not as familiar with that. I would have to go back and look. I know as far as when you buy your license, depending on which license you buy, you might have to buy the supplemental trout license, and then there are certain places like Gatlinburg, like if you're fishing in the city of Gatlinburg, you have to have a trout stamp and things like
Well,
that. So
you have
I
to have
don't
an
want to.
additional. You have to have an additional license to fish there.
Yeah,
So I'm
yeah,
I'm I'm pretty sure the freshwater license lets you fish, but if you're looking to keep the fish, eat the fish, then that's where the trout stand comes. I could be 100% wrong, but that's my understanding of it.
yeah. I would just need to go back and check the regulation, and that's kind of like what we go back to earlier. A lot of that information's out there. You kind of just have to go looking for it. If you go to your fish guide, they'll have a breakdown of all the different specific things like that. So if you know you're fishing Tellico, you can go and look for Tellico River under the trout streams, and it'll tell you all that information as well. So I don't want to misspeak on anything, but just be sure to check your fishing guide. And then if you still can't find an answer, you can send me an email, and I'll try to point you in the right direction later on. All right, is there a video or website you recommend that will show me how to clean a trout? Thanks.
Hmm.
I mean, if you're asking me, one of the first steps is, I mean, YouTube is a great resource. I'll try to find a good one and share with you guys tomorrow. We've done some videos like that for some of the hunting side of things, but we've not done any for the fishing, how to clean a fish. So that's something that we probably need to make and share with you guys. But YouTube's a great resource. If I've learned anything in my career as an outdoorsman, it's that everybody does things slightly differently. So you might watch one video and somebody do it one way, and then you watch another video and it's completely different. So I'll try to find a pretty good basic video to share so that for those of y'all that are wanting to take your trout home, you kind of know what to do with them. So I'll look for that. But Wes, did you have any resource that you had off the top of your head?
Yeah, no, I don't know. It's a great question. I don't think I've ever. I maybe some YouTube or Facebook shorts. I've seen people cleaning fish, but yeah, hit YouTube up, man. YouTube's. I've learned so much from YouTube. So
Yeah. All right, last question here, Wes. This is one for you. Where can I get more information on Project Healing Waters?
oh man, why am I not prepared for this one? Anyways, if you go, uh, let's see. Let me just make sure I'm going to tell the world properly. If you're on Facebook, at least if you're actually you can find the Johnson City chapter, Project Healing Waters Johnson City, and then reach out to Jason Shaw or myself. Jason Shaw is the program lead. Um, reach out to him via email or text message, and he'll get back to you and point you in the right direction. Or we'll go to, I'm pretty sure it's projecthealingwaters.org. Project, yeah, I should know this. It is projecthealingwaters.org. Let's see. This, that probably ain't coming from my crappy camera.
Here it goes.
So from there, you can actually find your local state and chapter that's closest to you and reach out to the program lead. And yeah, it's a nonprofit veterans based group that is ran by veterans who teach veterans how to fly fish. Man, we have the boots, we have the waders, we have the rods, we have the people to get you on the water. Uh, we meet once a month here in Johnson City, the first Thursday of every month at Freedom Hall. Again, please, if you're a veteran and want to get into the sport, reach out to me, reach out to the Facebook group, just hit the website up. It's awesome. I mean, I fished my whole life. I fly fish for 3 years before I even knew about this program, and I'm happy I did because I have the opportunity now to actually share my knowledge and teach people what I had to learn myself, so they don't have to go through the same struggle. But yeah, I'm sorry. That's just it means the world to me. I love getting. I almost enjoy watching somebody catch a fish more than catching one myself because it's like, hey, stand here, cast there, use this fly, and then they set the hook, and it's like, bam, first trout on the fly rod. It's just nothing like it.
Well, I know, Wes, yourself and some of the other folks that I've had the chance to work with have always had great things to say about Project Healing Waters. So it's cool to see you guys out there doing what y'all are doing. And again, I appreciate the help that you guys have offered me just here in the recent past. The workshops and virtual classes, you guys have been awesome to work with.
Hey man, just reach out again. Hopefully, I didn't embarrass myself too bad or embarrass you. But
No, I don't think so.
I love fly fishing and I love teaching people. And yeah, there's so much I could talk about in less than an hour or more than an hour. So yeah,
Yeah, for sure. Well, I appreciate you being on tonight. And guys, I know we went over just a few minutes, but if you're not following Tennessee Wildlife Federation on your social media, we're on, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We've got all kinds of videos on there for the Hunting and Fishing Academy, but also a lot of other information just on what's going on with our organization. So be sure to check us out there. We've got a few more virtual classes scheduled for, between now and June, which is technically the end of our year. But we've got stuff going on every month. So whether you're going to hit us back up in July, August, later on in the year, we really encourage you to check out some of the new virtual classes we've got coming for you here soon. We're going to be ramping up a lot of new topics coming into our new year, which starts in July. So lots of new hunting opportunities, lots of opportunities for people to learn how to shoot and do different things. So we just hope you stay in touch. Check us out. Keep watching these virtual classes. We appreciate y'all's participation more than you know. Wes, thanks again, man, for joining me. It's been a pleasure. We'll get together here soon, I'm sure.
it sounds good, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right, guys. Until next time, again, thank you so much. Hope y'all have a great rest of your evening. Thanks.